Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, SPC-209, whatever time you're consuming this little artifact of academic media. I am once again Vic McInnes, your interpersonal communication instructor, coming to you live on tape from the campus located next to the highway, Aiken Technical College, here in the heart of the bustling Graniteville, South Carolina metro area. Remember, Aiken Tech, your number one choice for higher education in Aiken County. Just so you guys know, if you see me doing this a lot, I'm wearing an old pair of glasses today, and right now the phone is just a little fuzzy because these are not new glasses and my prescription has changed a lot more than I thought it had. Okay, today we're going to be talking about communication in relationships. Asking some basic questions about why do we form relationships? Why do we terminate relationships? First thing we need to know is really there are two different kinds of relationships. First of all is a personal relationship. And a personal relationship is a relationship that meets our emotional, our relational, or our instrumental needs. And we're going to talk about those needs a little bit later on. The second kind of a relationship that we'll have is a social relationship. Now, a social relationship will occasionally meet some of those needs, but are less close and have very little interdependence. In other words, we're not necessarily relying on those people for those emotional, relational, or instrumental needs. A work relationship would be considered a social relationship. Someone you're not close to would be considered a social relationship. Okay? So here's why we have relationships. We meet basic needs. Okay? We have a need for inclusion. We need to be part of a group. We need to be, to put it bluntly, if you're a Darwinist and you believe in evolution, we've never lost that need or desire to be part of a herd or a pack. Or if your crow's a murder. Did you know that a group of crows is called a murder of crows? Okay, anyway. If we do not have that inclusion need met, we will withdraw into ourselves and eventually become loners, what we call loners, hermits, recluses, people that just remove themselves from society. We have a need for control. We have a need for control. Competency, confidence, and the freedom to make our own decisions modifies our relationships. Okay? Some of y'all probably had a relationship, and you'll notice, and we'll talk about how relationships change as we go through the different stages of our lives. But a major change in relationships that we all deal with are the relationships we have in our parents from the time we hit our mid to late teens until the time we're in our late 20s to early 30s, because we are exerting more control, and that will help define those relationships. Okay? And then finally, we have a need for affection. A need for affection. We need to be liked by others, and that's a uniquely human characteristic. For no other reason than we want to be liked. Now, some of you may have pets. You may have a dog or a cat. And a dog and a cat are a good pet. Because a dog, not a cat. I'm not a cat person. Dogs, people will say, well, my dog needs affection from you. No, your dog is working on as Pavlov proved, dogs are working on a cost benefit. I will be nice to you because you feed me. Humans need to be liked solely for the purpose of being liked, not to get anything else out of it. It's a uniquely human characteristic. Affection implies that we are in a relationship with someone who wants to be in a relationship with us. That is incredibly important to us. That we are in a relationship with someone who wants to be in a relationship with us. Okay? And that affection goes through that. Now the book goes into great detail on the stages of relationships. I am not going to cover that but you better read it and know it thoroughly. You will see it later on in all likelihood. Okay, stages of relationship. It starts with, I think, table 7.1, and then it goes through all the stages. Read that. We're going to jump forward to social exchange theory. Social exchange theory. Social exchange theory is that social behavior is the result of an exchange process, a give and take. And the purpose of this exchange is to maximize benefits for me while minimizing cost. And when cost becomes greater than the benefits, we will terminate the relationships. Okay? All relationships are give and take. Social exchange theory dictates at what point we decide there is more take than give. That's it, we terminate the relationship. This works especially for personal relationships. Okay? And sometimes it's a lot harder. If you're in a social relationship with somebody and they wind up, you just see them every once in a while, you go out and you have a couple of beers, and they get you in a big fight and you wind up in jail, there's no benefit there. It's all take, no give, I'm out. For personal relationships, it can go much longer and be much more complex to do the analysis. The basics of social exchange is cost versus benefit. Cost versus benefit. Cost involves things you see as negatives, such as having to put money or time or effort into a relationship. Now, does that mean no relationship is worth money, time, or effort? No, it does not. But those are some examples of cost. The benefits are things that you get out of it, such as fun, friendship, companionship, social support, things like that. So, two other things you need to figure into social exchange theory. First, expectations and comparisons. Our expectations are driven by past experiences. We are inherently going to compare our level of satisfaction with any relationship we're in with previous relationships we've had that are similar. Okay? That's just human nature, and we do it all the time. We may be dissatisfied with a current relationship based on a comparison with a prior relationship. I mean, we all do this. Well, last time I had a relationship and I was involved with a person like that, it turned out really, really ugly, so I ain't hanging around this time. Or, I really appreciated having a friend that had several similar experiences that I had had. So I'm attracted to this person, and attracted doesn't necessarily mean in a sexual way. I'm attracted to this person because that previous relationship was very beneficial to me. So I will be further engaged in this relationship. Because the comparison with my earlier relationship has led me to an expectation in this one that this will be a beneficial relationship, and the cost-benefit analysis will be for the positive. Okay? The other thing we need to do, and I get a lot of people upset when I say this, is when we evaluate the alternatives. Our satisfaction with the relationship is oftentimes driven by our options for other relationships. Okay? How many times, and again, I am getting, I am looking at the backside of my 50s at this point, so I don't know a lot of people who date anymore. But when I did know people that dated, how many times did I hear, it's not the person I want to be with for the rest of my life, but who else am I going to go out with now? I mean, there's nobody here. I don't work with anybody. The social scene of this town is dead. At least we go out. Why don't you who else am I going to socialize with? And I will tell you this. We have been friends with people. We have been acquaintances with people. Let me say this, my wife and I. We were in a social group of about 5 couples when we lived in Tampa that used to socialize together. We used to, while our children were in the church youth group, we'd go out and get dinner. We'd get together occasionally for, evenings out, go to restaurants. I will tell you, 2 of the 4 other couples, we could hardly stand. In one case, we liked the husband, but not the wife. In another case, we liked the wife and not the husband. But we were like, God, yeah, there's so much cost in going to these things. Yeah, but if we don't go out to dinner with this group, who are we going to be friends with? Who are we going to socialize with? Because we worked all the way across another county, almost a county and a half. So we didn't socialize with people at work. There wasn't anybody else in the other social organizations that we were with, because it's Tampa. Everybody's, the average age is 114. Okay, so for people like us in our 40s at that time, we didn't have any other alternatives, so we stuck with that group. So the cost-benefit analysis, we were willing to take more cost to achieve the benefit. Now, we heard from people when we had to redefine the nature of that group, because one of the members, and the thing we had in common that started the group was we all had children that were roughly the same age. At the time the group formed, everybody's kids were, either young teenagers, like no older than 13, no younger than like 9. And there was one person within the group who did nothing but talked really horrible stuff about their kids. And when we had to formally redefine the rules of the group, one of the things we said was, you can't bitch about your kids. We just don't want to hear it anymore. That person then made the decision that there was no more benefit for them in that group or in that relationship. And so they cut ties with the group. The benefit they got out of the group was that they thought they had a sympathetic ear to complain about their children. Okay? That was their benefit. Their cost, I guess, was just putting up with the other 9 hours. Pretty soon, they determined that since they weren't getting the benefit, the cost wasn't worth it. They cut their ties with the group. Okay? Now, a lot of people, when I teach this class in person, a lot of people argue with me over social exchange theory because it seems very cold and very calculating, and it's really not. Because we are talking about an emotional cost and an emotional benefit. So, in a lot of times, this emotional benefit is really great. So we're willing to take a lot of cost and absorb a lot of cost. Okay? But you've been, and sometimes it's a perceived, hoped for benefit at some point in time in the future. And I think that probably the easiest example of that is a difficult, I won't say abusive because we're going to talk about anger a little bit later on in the lecture. A spouse or a parent that is difficult. Okay, and there is immediate obvious cost, but there is an expected benefit at some point in time in the future. But at some point, a lot of times we just go, man, this cost is getting too much. I gotta go. Okay, I gotta call a lawyer. I can't talk to my, very familiar with an instance where it's just like I have to minimize contact with with a parent. Okay, I just can't keep doing it. Okay, and that's not to say these are all definitely hardcore analytics. A lot of times they are. Had a friend of mine one time that came in, wanted to talk to me for a minute. And I said, sure. Came in and showed me a spreadsheet. Pro for staying married, con for staying married. Now, if you're at this point, okay? All right, so social exchange theory. Incredibly important in maintaining our relationships. So let's talk about one type of relationship, friendships. A friendship is a voluntary relationship between two people who are equals and are mutually beneficial to each other. Okay? Friendships have to be based on equality. That's why one thing you never heard me say to my children when they were growing up, my children are now 27 and 24, and for all you know, those are correct. My children never watch these tapes. My daughters never watch these tapes. They won't yell at me. They are 27 and 24 now. Now we can be friends because I no longer have to parent them full time. I never wanted to be, when I was in my 40s, there was no circumstances where I would be really friends with a 14-year-old. That's just on one level creepy, and on another level, when it's my child, my job was the parent, not the friend. And it was my job to set standards, set boundaries, set rules. So we weren't in an equal position. It would be difficult for us to be friends. Because we're defining friendship as between two people who are equals and mutually benefit each other. There are three types of friendships. There are reciprocal friends. These are solid friends between equals with a loyalty and commitment. This is where everybody's benefit, everybody's getting the same, everything is pretty much equal. There are associative friends. Associative friends, this is a positive relationship, but it involves a specific association. Oftentimes, we'll refer to these people as acquaintances as opposed to friends. I just did that, talking about our social group from down in Tampa. Were several of those people who I was a reciprocal friend with, but then there were others where I was just an associative friend. Okay? Then there are what we'll call receptive friendships. And while these receptive friendships are between two equals, there is a perceived status difference or assigned roles within the friendship. Pastor, parishioner, supervisor, subordinate, celebrity, normal human. I mean, if you ever meet a real celebrity, it's kind of weird to be friends with them. Okay? And again, a receptive relationship, friendship is where everybody are equals, but it's very difficult for you to break out of those assigned roles. One of the weirdest dinners I ever went to, in a lot of ways the most awkward, was when I became an elder in our church. The pastor invited me and my wife over for dinner. And it was very weird to sort of step between a receptive friendship and maybe into an associative or a reciprocal friendship. We were sort of redefining it on the fly. And ultimately what we came down to is I think my wife and I agreed, receptive friendship was fine for them. You know, if we were going to go back and we would see them in social situations, we were not going to think of them as reciprocal friends. There was going to be a receptive friendship where they would be the pastor and the pastor's spouse, and we would be parishioners. Okay? So how do we wind up being friends with some people and not friends with others? First of all, is proximity. We become friends with people because of proximity, because we're close, because we see them regularly. We become friends for reasons of reciprocity. We've already kind of discussed that. Reciprocity. We like someone when they like us. We become friends with someone when we perceive that they want to be friends with us. We become friends because of similarity. We feel they're like us. We feel that we have a lot of things in common. Things we'll be able to talk about. We become friends because of attractiveness. And you can, and again, I'm not talking about just physical appearance when I say attractiveness. I'm also talking about their attitudes, their experiences. We find those attractive. Okay? We become friends with someone because of peer and family acceptance. Why? And this happens in TV shows about high school all the time. Why are you hanging out with him? Oh, his dad is friends with my dad, so we have to hang out together. Okay? Why are you friends with this person? Well, because all my other friends are friends with that person, so I'm kind of there. So might as well. We become friends with people because they exhibit social competence. Competence. They have behaviors that we wish to emulate or we admire. And then finally, we become friends because of self-disclosure. Listen, I know I don't know you very well, but I've got to tell somebody this, or I'm just going to die. And once you tell them, suddenly you've become intimate. And again, we're not talking about physically intimate, we're talking about emotionally intimate. And so suddenly, self-disclosure brings self-disclosure. So suddenly, this is why you become friends, why you can be sitting next to somebody on an airplane, on a long flight, and suddenly you find out, well, you hear yourself saying to this person you've never met before, well, yeah, I know, but he drinks a lot, and that's beginning to wear me down. I have to begin to question, when is it going to be enough? And the person next to you goes, yeah, my previous husband. And suddenly you guys are having really intense conversations about the nature of your relationships with a person you've never met before. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's a safe, anonymous environment. But self-disclosure brings self-disclosure, and you only self-disclose to friends. So if I'm telling you stuff and you're telling me stuff, we must be buddies. Okay? But within our lives, as we cross time, the nature of our friendships change. Like, for instance, in adolescence, and I'm not going to write these down, these phrases should be familiar to you. In adolescence, and that's defined as when we reach puberty through our teens. This is a major point in time. We start there because really in adolescence is the first opportunity you have to pick your own friends. Okay? You begin to shift from, as you go through your teens, you begin to shift in identifying your social support network, shifts from your parents to your friends. All right? Self-identity is not firm yet, so friends have an increased impact on our self-identity. I mean, you've seen, if you're a parent, you've had this conversation. If you can remember when you were a young teenager, you probably heard this from your parents. You certainly see it all the time on television. I just don't like this group they're running around with these days because they're leading them down a bad path. And that sentence makes sense because as an adolescent, we get a good deal of our self-identity from our friends because our self-identity is not hard and is not firm yet. And since we're no longer getting it from our parents, we're getting it from our friends. In adolescence, since our self is so anchored in friendships, our self-identity is so anchored in friendships, we have a tendency, or adolescents have a tendency to be more jealous and move to extreme emotions like anger much quicker. Okay? If everything I am and my self-identity is defined by being a friend with you and you stop talking to me, I'm not just out of a friendship, my self-identity is now in crisis. How many of y'all are going like, whoa? I remember when I first heard that, I was like, that's unbelievable, but absolutely true. That explains why teenagers get stupid. Because, because you have a 14-year-old come into your house and they act like they're, you start collecting all the sharp objects out of the kitchen because they act like they're going to stab you. And then when you finally get down to the root of it, they are no longer talking to their best friend. And now their entire self-identity, which was defined by that group of friends that they are now no longer part of, their entire self-identity is now in question. Okay? The next step, early adulthood. Begins in your 20s, and these days it's shifting. When you shift out of early adulthood into adulthood, it's changing a great deal. But it begins in your 20s. Our self-identity and who we are is still evolving. So our friends, far more than our parents, will begin to give us feedback on our self-identity. Okay? A lot of times we will try to maintain friendships with people who we were friends with when we were adolescents just to maintain a continuity. And to maintain that sense of self that we developed as adolescents, we will try to maintain those relationships as we move through early adulthood in order to give ourselves continuity in our self-identity. Then we move into adulthood, in which case our ability to form friendships in adulthood becomes significantly more constrained. We've got jobs, we've got family, we may have money issues. You can't go to a bar and go drinking every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night anymore. You can't hang out with your buds all the time because you got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and drive all the way to the Savannah River plant. I'm not going to be here for the next 6 months because I'm leaving the country for a job. Okay, these are things you never had to worry about. And suddenly they're the driving factors. Friendships as adults are oftentimes driven by a desire for stability. Not self-identity, not self-affirmation like when you were an adolescent and a young adult, but for stability. I've heard many adults saying, I don't know when the last time I made a new friend was. Because you don't want new friends. You want stability. We will oftentimes, as adults, use friends to process thoughts and emotion. In other words, we'll bounce things off each other. And when geographically separated from our biological families, we will use these friends as stand-ins for the remainder of our families. Okay? We didn't do this in my house, but you will have a lot of people where, a friend, a non-biological friend, or a friend who is not a biological relative, will become Uncle Jerry or Aunt Sue, because they are filling that familial role that you can't geographically fill. In my house, we always did the old Southern thing where everybody was known, children called adults by Mr. Bob or Miss Jerry. Okay? We never did the uncle and aunt thing. I had one person in my life that was my mother's best friend growing up that we called Aunt Edna, and it blew my mind, and I was so confused when I found out that I never could figure out. It always bothered me what our familiar relationship was, and it really bothered me when I found out we weren't actually related biologically. But in a lot of cases, when we are geographically separated from our extended families, we will use those friends as adult friends. We will use our friends to fill in for our biological families that aren't present. I will tell you, my in-laws, my children, my in-laws are in Vermont. It's far enough as far as they can get and still be in the United States, pretty much. My father passed away when my kids were fairly young. My mother was in Alabama, which was originally 12 hours away, even though we were in Florida, 8 hours away when she moved. But we were in this church, and we had this wonderful couple, Ken and Bev, who became surrogate grandparents to my children. They loved it because their grandchildren were in California. And so being able to help a parent or to help grandparent our children was mutually beneficial for all of us. And yes, that sounds cold and calculating, but it is absolutely a fact. Okay, Ken was a retired Air Force officer. He was, when we met them out, we were in our early 40s. They were in their mid 70s. And our children basically, when they would sit with them at church, we'd be sitting on one side of the sanctuary. Ken and Bev would be sitting on the other side, and they would look at us and go, "Can we go sit with Ken and Bev?" And the first time I did, they said, I walked over and I asked them. They said, "Oh, we'd love to have them." And they became almost surrogate grandparents for my kids, because we used our friends to fill that familiar role. Then when we pass through adulthood and we get into later lives, okay, physical and mental capacities will also oftentimes dictate who we're friends with. Okay, a lot of times because of mobility issues, it'll be the people that you live with. And one of the biggest detractors or detriments to the quality of life for an older person will be that they can't get out and they can't have social engagements like they used to. My uncle, my father's twin brother, is 96. My Aunt Roberta, his wife, is 94. They had just begun to realize that they weren't able to get out and socialize with their friends as much. They just weren't physically able to do it anymore. They were in their late 80s. So they moved into one of those retirement communities. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of looking forward to getting to that point, because they have structured social engagements every day of the week. And it has hugely improved their quality of life, because they are not restricted by their physical and mental capacities to make friends anymore. They have people assisting them with that. So they have this massive group of friends that they now socialize with. Okay? And also, there are things that happen in that phase of life that most people don't have to deal with. Diminishing physical capacities, okay? Loss of spouses. These are things that most people don't deal with until that stage of life. So you seek out people that are both close proximity-wise and close age-wise so that you can share those experiences. And that will be the driving factors on who your friends are. Now, does this mean you cannot be best friends for your entire life with someone you met when you were 3? Absolutely not. But this is how relationships develop over time. One more thing, cross-gender friendships, okay? Cross-gender friendships can be very important as adolescents, but they begin to diminish over time, especially once we begin to enter into lifelong marital relationships. Now, we'll have a caveat for this that I'm still looking for answers for, okay? And I haven't found any decent research to spell it out. But when you have a husband or a wife, it becomes, you can have a cross-gender relationship or friendship as part of a couple. In other words, couples are our friends. So we're very close friends. One of those couples from Tampa, Margaret and John. My wife and I are close friends with Margaret and John. If I just wanted to go out and have lunch with Margaret without John or my wife being present, that would just be weird. Now, here's what I don't have an answer for. And I had someone ask me this question once, and I just sort of went, I don't know. And I don't know the answer to this. And if any of you have insight, please let me know. Okay? I don't know how that impacts same-gender couples. I don't know if that extends to same-gender friendships. I really don't know. And I've tried to do some research, and I've tried to find people that are doing studies on it. Okay? And it's just not a field of study that has been, that people have jumped into in any great depth. I'm not sure how, all of our research up to this point has been on mixed gender couples, a man and a woman. How a man, 2 men in a relationship, a marital relationship, or 2 women in a marital relationship, how they would react to cross-gender or same-gender friendships outside of the marriage, I'm not really sure about. But I will tell you, that was one of the best emails I got, because I love emails because number one, it showed that the person was actually listening to the lecture. And that happened here at Aiken Tech. And it also challenged me to update my thoughts on the subject I teach. Okay? Now, let's talk about another form of relationship that we all have at some level, families. Families are usually defined by the nature of their communications. I am not going to worry about labeling the structure, because I think that is all in flux. I'm not going to say there's a mom and a dad, because that just doesn't work anymore. Does it work for a lot of families? Yes. Did it used to be families that didn't look like that were the exceptions? Yes, but these days, familiar relationships are really defined by the nature of their communications. Families have interaction rituals. Interaction rituals. These relational cultures, which we call families, have interactional routines. There are patterned family interactions. There are family traditions. there are family celebrations. Okay? Pattern family interactions are not technically a ritual, but we execute them so often, they become a pattern that we expect, and if they don't happen, we begin to question why they didn't. Okay? A lot of families, you're home for dinner every night, no matter what, unless it's a big exception. That was something I grew up with. We had dinner every night, 7 nights a week at home. And if you didn't have dinner at home, it had to be something, you had to have an excuse. Okay? Occasionally my parents would be away with some of the volunteer work they did. You know, when we got older and got into high school, my brother was on the football team. I was doing the color guard at football games with ROTC. So Friday nights but that was the exception. And that was a rule that we put in place. And my wife grew up in similar with the same thing. So whenever we would, it had to be an exception for us not to have dinner together as a family. That was a ritual. Okay? It was a pattern interaction. It was something you could rely on happening every day. Family traditions are something that happen less often, but happen in the same way every time. Birthdays, Christmas, vacations, okay? Family reunions. My father's family has been having a family reunion every other year since 1976. My father was one of 7 children. And each of those 7 children had at least 2 children. So my first cousins, that's a big group. And they were scattered all over the world. And as they began to retire, the surviving 5 brothers and sisters decided they wanted to get together on a regular basis. So every 2 years, starting in 1976, we started getting together. As I've said, my father's twin brother is the only sibling left, and yet we still get together for family reunions. It's become a bit weird because the family's sort of broken off into 2 groups. And one group of my cousins, who there are 5 of them, they sort of use it as a family reunion for them, and then we sort of get together, and it's kind of changing, but it is a family tradition. Traditionally, our family gets together every 2 years for a reunion. What's happening now that's really weird to that tradition is my cousins, this would seem to be, normal. My father's twin brother, his children, and my brother, we're all really close friends. We all talk a lot. Our children are all very close. There's eight of them total. I've got 2, my brother's got 4. Okay, there's 10 of them. And they're all very close. So they're all driving this family tradition now within a separate branch within that bigger, and they're beginning to ask, the generation past me are now beginning to try to modify that tradition, which is kind of interesting to watch. Okay? Family celebrations are very standardized within a family, across family, but they vary wildly between cultures. Not wildly, that's a bad word. They vary greatly between cultures. When we moved to San Antonio, I was working with a good friend of mine, Orlando. We had known each other previously. He had been, when he was in the Air Force, he was assigned up in D.C., and we had worked together. He retired to San Antonio, and when me and my family moved to San Antonio, we became friends. And within about 6 months after us moving there, his daughter turned 15. And we got invited to her quinceañera party. I think that's, yeah. You guys can correct me. We were invited to her quinceañera. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know you had a party for someone for a girl when she turned 15. But quinceañeras in San Antonio are a massive deal. I mean, spending, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars. And I was completely unfamiliar with this. And it is a ritual celebration. It is a family ritual celebration. Within your family, you may have your own celebrations. Within my family, when we graduate from college in my family, and this goes back to my parents, when my brother and I are first generation college graduates. My mother and father got to Auburn a day before my brother, drug me along, and we got there a day early so that we could go around campus taking pictures. When I graduated, my parents came along a day early. My brother came up that afternoon. We took pictures around campus. When my wife did not have that experience at all. Her parents showed up a couple hours before graduation, got a couple of pictures, they went home. When my oldest daughter was graduating from Auburn, she said, well, you guys are, graduation's this date, I expect you. And I said, well, no, we'll be up the day before. Why? Because you're going to need somebody to take your picture. And she's like, what are you talking about? We'll come up so you can go around campus, take pictures in your cap and gown. She was like going, that's so hokey. But when we got there, it became a huge ritual. So when my second daughter graduated from Mississippi State, everybody just sort of expected you'll get here a day early so we can take pictures. And we did. And it's fun. It is a celebration. It is a ritual celebration within our family. Okay? Now, after families, the biggest relationships we have are at work. Okay, I should close this out in an hour. Woohoo! All right. We have two major types of relationships at work. Supervisor and subordinate, and what we're going to call workplace friends. Supervisor, subordinate, remember we talked about friendships are equals. Can you be your friend with your boss? There are formal roles in supervisor subordinates. One has formal authority as the boss. You can be friendly, and I'm going to say this, you can even be romantically involved with each other. Okay? But we can see if it's not equal where the problem is there. And now, hundreds of thousands of lawsuits later, a lot of, most companies have policies explicitly stating you cannot be romantically involved with one of your subordinates. You can be involved in a mentoring relationship where the supervisor acts as a guide to help the person advance in their own careers. Now, a workplace friend is usually a peer or a coworker. It's possible it could be somebody from another organization. But usually your peers or your coworker. Within that, there are three categories. There are information peers. And information peers is someone you only talk about work with. You do not talk about your personal lives at all. It's just about the job. We have collegial peers. And with collegial peers, there is some self-disclosure on personal topics, but really it's still focused on the work. I made a shift over from being information peers to being collegial peers with several of my coworkers when I had my first child. And I came in and somebody pointed out that my daughter had spit up all down the back of my jacket. Suddenly, I am making self-disclosures with any number of people in the office. Okay? And then finally, you have, and I always love it when you call it this, special peers. Special peers are a very unique relationship that has a high level of personal disclosures with very few limitations. Okay? A lot of times, if anybody here is former military spouse, a military brat, military kid, you will be familiar with these kind of relationships where the work relationship is almost all encompassing. So you begin to make, full self-disclosures. When and again, this was something my wife didn't understand until she went to deployed to Afghanistan. But when you're sitting next to someone 12 to 18 hours a day, and you're working with them day in and day out, and the only thing you really do for months and months at a time is you work and you eat and you sleep and you go to the gym, and that is it, you wind up special peers with a lot of your coworkers. Okay? Last topic for the day. Every relationship, okay, let me rephrase this. No relationship is perfect. Every relationship is going to run into a problem. And anger is part and parcel of every relationship. Okay? Anger is neither good nor bad. It's just an emotion. It's how we deal with anger that dictates, in a lot of cases, the cost and benefit of the relationship. So first of all, anger is neither good nor bad. Violence within a relationship is never acceptable, though. Okay? We used to call it domestic violence. Now we call it intimate partner violence. Okay? Intimate partner violence can be physical. It can be verbal. It can be emotional. And it is the use of one of these three in order to control the other person in the relationship. It's not about expressing your feelings. It's not about, letting them know how they've hurt you or why you're angry. It is about control. There is also violent resistance. Violent resistance is when you meet intimate partner violence with more violence. And then there's situational partner violence. And this is violence that is caused by a very specific set of circumstances. Okay? Difficult events or emotions. Now, a lot of times people that are actually perpetrating intimate partner violence as a way to control the situation, to control their partner, are going to say that it's just situational, that happened that once, and it's not. There's a pattern. Okay? None of these, even though violent resistance is a response to intimate partner violence, none of this should ever be acceptable. Anger is one thing. Expressing anger is a natural human process, especially within a relationship. Intimate partner violence, though, is done to control the other person. Situational partner violence is also not acceptable. So if someone is being violent in a relationship and they say, well, I just did that because of this one specific set of circumstances, that is not okay. We also need to deal with something called communicative aggression. Communicative aggression. And I'm not going to write all these down. Communicative aggression involves communication principles that we discussed way back in lecture 1. In order to degrade the partner, so you can, communicative aggression could be degradation, where you're insulting or demeaning them. That is intimate partner violence. You can physically or emotionally withdraw from the other person. That is using communication as a tool for aggression. That is restricting another person's actions, even through not actually telling them they can't do something, but communicating to them that they are being watched at all times. There is domination, where you use communication to prevent the other person from communicating or talking. Every time they start talking, you start screaming so that they can't be heard. And then finally, there is using communication to threaten physical harm. All of those, degradation, physical or emotional withdrawal, restricting another person's actions, even through over-monitoring, domination, and threatening physical harms, those aren't leading up to intimate partner violence. That is intimate partner violence. That is aggressive behavior. A lot of times people are trying to make excuses. Well, he didn't actually hit her. He doesn't have to be aggressive. Okay. Throw in a little caveat right now. I want everybody to understand. I have had happen at this point in this lecture, when we talk about anger and we talk about intimate partner violence, okay, and we talk about communicative aggression, do not ask me if I think X behavior on the part of your spouse is communicative aggression. I'm not qualified to deal with that. I need to talk to you about it as part of this lecture on relationships, but I can't answer that question in any sort of a qualified manner. If you want to reach out to me and say, hey, listen, I may be involved in a relationship like you discussed at the end of the lecture, fine. I will be happy to try to connect you with some resources. Actually, I'm going to refer you to somebody here on campus. I'm just going to I'm just going to ask you if I can give your name to that person, and that's how we're going to take care of that, because I am not qualified to, do not imply that the 10 minutes of the lecture I just gave here, that I'm qualified to speak and help you deal with those situations. Because I truly, truly am not. I can assist you, but I can't help you solve your problems like that, okay? And yeah, I have had that happen. When we start talking about intimate partner violence, I have had people send me emails, well, my spouse is involved in this communicative aggression you talked about. How do I deal with that? Well, you deal with that by finding counseling. And I can give you the name of a person that can help with that. And that will be my response. Please write me so I can get you that person's name. Okay? But I'm not in any way qualified to help you resolve that situation. Okay. 58 minutes, 53 seconds. Kept it under an hour. All right. So yeah, kind of a downer to end on, but that's sometimes the way life is. Okay? So next, expect to see the discussion board fairly soon. Next, we're moving on to Chapter 8, one of my favorite chapters, Culture. That will be a joint SPC-205, SPC-209 lecture. It'll be great. All right, that is it. Everyone stay safe, and we will see you soon.